How to quarantine the humble fish way.
Here is all the equipment that you will need to set up a quarantine tank of your very own. The top list shows the bare essentials that are required each and every time you quarantine any fish. And the bottom list shows some optional equipment that we recommend. While not technically required, both you and your fish will have an easier time if you can use these items. The bare essentials include an aquarium, of course. 10 to 30 gallons seems to work well for most people, but you may need 40 gallons or larger depending upon the type of fish that you're wanting to quarantine. A bigger aquarium lets you house more fish and gives you more wiggle room when it comes to ammonia, but a smaller aquarium is cheaper, it's easier to maintain, and can be set up and broken down quickly. Plus, you don't need as much of the medication for a smaller aquarium than you do for a larger aquarium, obviously. You will need a heater and a thermometer, a small power head or an air pump and a sponge filter for circulation and gas exchange. You'll also need freshly mixed salt water which has been fully dissolved and circulating for at least 24 hours. The optional equipment that we recommend include a light, which can be just a simple one bulb fixture. A white light works best for seeing fish diseases. You can use a hang-on-back power filter where a seated sponge and other biomedia can be added. Also, egg crate used in lighting panels can be easily cut with snips to build a custom top to prevent the fish from jumping out. PVC elbows can be used as caves for the fish to hide in, and plastic plants can simulate a more natural environment. This way the fish won't freak out whenever they see their reflection on the glass bottom of the aquarium. You will probably also want to use a Seachem ammonia alert badge because most liquid ammonia test kits give a false positive in the presence of medications. And a titanium grounding probe is helpful to neutralize any stray voltage that may be in the water because of faulty equipment.
Okay, I'm setting up a 29-gallon quarantine tank, so I thought I could take this opportunity to do a brief overview of how to set up a quarantine tank. The very first thing you want to do is you want to be sure the tank is leveled. You want to do this both before and after you put water in the tank. At the moment, there's no water in it. I'm going to do another video once it's filled. So you want to put a level on it, and you just want to be sure that it's reasonably level in between the lines. And you also want to level it this way, and you want to level it here. So the tank is reasonably leveled, it can be used. Again, you want to do this again after it's filled. So let's go over some of the specifics of the quarantine tank. So the first thing you'll notice is I'm using an AquaClear power filter, and I'm using this sponge that's where the nitrifying bacteria is going to be used as biological filtration there. You can also use Seachem Matrix and Fluval Biomax. I'll do that in another slide, but this is perfectly fine to use one or two sponges in here, and these will house nitrifying bacteria which can be used for biological filtration in quarantine. Another thing about a power filter I want you to see is this, because a lot of times if you're quarantining smaller fish,
you want to pull it off so you can see
so that's what it is normally like. But what we did was we took this and we made a cover for the intake, so that way
you kind of just make like a rectangle out of the sponge and then just kind of cut a little slit in it with a knife.
Right.
And that way it'll cover the intake and the fish won't get caught to the intake.
Exactly. If you're dealing with smaller fish or you're quarantining, say, a fish that's a bit weak. So we have our heater here. I'm just leaving everything kind of loose just so I can show everything. And there's a thermometer over here for the temperature. A lot of people don't use these. They don't use titanium grounding probes in quarantine. I do. I mean, they're like 10, 15 bucks. So you want to have one of these. And I want to also point out something you don't see in a lot of videos. That is a drip loop. And all equipment, everything that's got a cord hanging out of my tank is going to have a drip loop. And the point is, if the fish were to splash water or something onto the cord, instead of the water riding its way down to the wall outlet, it will be here on the drip loop and it will just drip. So it's a safety feature, right, onto the floor. Here I'm using just an old MP10 for additional circulation. Again, it's got a foam cover, to protect any fish. And you don't have to use an MP10, it's just what I had available. I've actually got, this is another good example, you can use just a Corellia wave maker. These are nice because you can point up because you want the circulation, the flow breaking the surface of the water. So you can use this or just whatever, you know, inexpensive power head or wave maker that you're comfortable using. It just needs to produce flow. For a tank this size, this is a 29 gallon. I would do something that had at least 600 to 800 gallons per hour. Or if you don't want to do that, you can do an air pump. Here's an air pump with a gang valve and some tubing and an air stone, and it will break the surface of the water. It'll create gas exchange and promote oxygen in the quarantine tank. The only thing with these, they're a little bit messy because of the spray, but I mean, it is an option to use. Okay, let's see what else we got. So this will be sea chemical ammonia alert badge. Will go in the tank once it's actually filled with water. PVC. So this is something I also don't really see discussed much in quarantine videos. So I prefer PVC like this that is flat and doesn't move. I mean, it's fairly stable. It's actually like an elbow that's just flat. These right here, sometimes people use, and the problem with it is, see how it can kind of, if the flow hits it too much, it can actually rock a little bit. The problem with that is sometimes fish will get behind here, sleep at night. If the flow hits it and it rocks on the fish and possibly kills the fish. So that's something you probably want to go more like that, maybe less like that.
We usually do one that has 3 outlets instead of 4.
Yeah, that's just what I had on hand, but it doesn't have to be that big. I like this one because it's nice and heavy. It's not going to move.
And the inside radius of it, you want to determine by the size of the fish that you're quarantining.
Right, exactly.
You need something like this for like a tang. That's, what was that, like 3 or 4 inches?
Yeah.
And then you could get like a 2-inch one for like smaller fish.
Right.
Because
Exactly.
they don't want the big, huge thing. They just get, swallowed up.
Yep. And so there's that. Okay, so then sort of like show the whole thing. So one thing I want to point out here is this whole system is self-contained. You can see down below I have another aquarium. It's a 20 gallon long. That's what I use for top off, or if I need to do water changes. I just do it down there. I've got my nets, I've got my food, I've got a pitcher for top off. In here, there is everything I need. But the point is test kits and refractometers and everything. Everything for this quarantine tank, all of the equipment you see here is dedicated for this quarantine tank. And the point of that is you want to avoid cross-contamination. You don't want to ever use something or share something between your quarantine system and your display tank or your frag tank or something, because you want to limit any chance of cross-contamination. So everything is self-contained. When I fool around in here, when I work on the quarantine tank, I don't touch my display tank or any other aquarium until I have taken a shower, or at least cleaned my hands really well. I think sometimes that's one of the biggest mistakes people make is they don't think about it. They're working on the quarantine tank, they go work on the display tank, cross-contamination occurs. So, okay, so in the very next video, I will show this with water in it and a few more things to discuss there. Okay, the quarantine tank is filled and running. Just want to show this, that here's the ammonia alert badge, and it's yellow, and it should be yellow at all times. That means you have no ammonia in the quarantine tank. Heater's running, everything's on. I keep, for most purposes, you want to keep your quarantine tank between, we'll say 76 and 78 degrees Fahrenheit. So let's just go ahead and start peeling back the layers. Let's take this off. So, light fixture, I just use a single 1 bulb fixture, white light, because it's easier to see the fish and diseases in white light. Okay, and here is the lid, and I'll pull that off so you can get a better view of that. And as you can see, we just used egg crate and there's some screen that was we sewed under the lid, and the reason that we always sew the screen under the lid is
because if you do it the other way, then the fish can actually climb, like they can jump into, let me see this, you can jump into this and wiggle underneath it, and we actually had a fish do that in the middle of the night,
a diamond goby.
and it like rubbed its little fins off, unfortunately, because he couldn't get out, so we had to cut open the screen on the lid and let him out, and then keep him longer in quarantine actually in observation, to let him grow his little fins back.
But if this is the downside, that can't happen because if the fish jumps and hits, then he's just going to hit the screen.
Right.
It can't
Fall back
happen. In this quarantine tank, I'm just using this. You'll see in like another video where I actually cut out the center of this, and there's the center is just the screen only. That's for wrasses and other fish that are prone to spinal injuries. So let's put this over here for right now. And let's kind of look at the surface here if we can. So this is very important. You can see I've got the power filter going and I've got the MP10 going, and you see that disturbance on the surface of the water, how that's very important because fish need lots of oxygen, especially if you're using medications. Medications tend to deplete oxygen, so you want to have a lot of gas exchange and a lot of disturbance here at the surface to help with that. Can you get from under there? You can kind of see how that the surface of the water is disturbed. That's what you want for your quarantine tank. You probably want even more than this if you're actually going to be dosing medications or even multiple medications, because the more medications you dose, the more oxygen that gets depleted from the water. So we got everything set up. We got our...
Also, you could get a little bit more disturbance if you had the water level down just a little bit from
Yep.
the top of the power filter, because then it would have to fall into the water.
Yep, or you could raise the MP10 to create more disturbance. You could do it either way. So everything's running, everything's ready to go. We're ready for our fish. The last thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be dosing a nitrifying bacteria product. I use Fritz, but I mean there's a lot of other ones. There's Biospira, there's Dr. Tim's. They all contain nitrifying bacteria, and I'm going to start dosing this today. I'm going to wait about a week before I add fish, and what's going to happen is the bacteria are going to find their way into the sponges, and that's your biomedia. They're going to colonize it, and as water passes through the power filter, the bacteria are going to remove ammonia from the water, which again, that's the number one killer in quarantine is ammonia. And another video or slide you're going to see where I also recommend you can use Seachem Matrix or Fluval Biomax. You can put either one of those right here in a media bag inside the power filter. So pretty much that's it. It's all ready to go. The only thing I'll point out is kind of interesting is this, we talked about this. This PVC was actually more facing towards me, but because of the flow from the MP10, bouncing off the side glass, it's actually starting to slowly rotate where this one is staying stable. So just a little something to point out. You want to use heavy, stable PVC. Okay, that's it.
Not all biomedia can be used in quarantine because some will absorb copper and other medications the same way that rock does. Fortunately, in addition to using a sponge or foam insert, we have successfully tested that both Seachem Matrix and Fluval Biomax are inert when it comes to copper absorption. Both Matrix and Biomax should be placed inside a media bag as shown before being used inside a power filter.
Reducing stress on fish in quarantine is very important. As previously discussed, using PVC elbows can provide hiding and sleeping spaces for a fish. In addition, saltwater-safe plastic plants can be used to simulate a more natural environment for the fish. Just be sure to avoid using plastic plants with any metal wire or weights. Sometimes you need to use smaller PVC for smaller fish. PVC pipe can be glued together using reef-safe epoxy, silicone, super glue, and even hot glue in order to create fish hotels for wrasses and other small fish to hide in. Thanks to Aaron Gray for teaching me this and providing this video.
So let's review how a quarantine tank is set up. Here we see a heater, a thermometer, a PVC elbow for hiding, an alert badge for keeping tabs on ammonia, a hang-on back power filter, and a wave maker for additional circulation. Remember that biomedia such as a sponge, matrix, and/or biomax should be used in the power filter to house nitrifying bacteria. A bacteria in a bottle product should be dosed in the quarantine tank for at least a week before adding fish to seed the biomedia. This is essential in order to establish biological filtration in quarantine, which helps to control ammonia. Ammonia is probably the #1 killer of fish in quarantine.
Here is a video of my quarantine room, and I would like you to notice two things. I do use a light layer of sand in my quarantine tanks, especially for fish that burrow or sift sand. I have done extensive testing and sand does not absorb very much copper like rock does. I only caution that when you transfer the fish out of quarantine, be sure there is no sand attached to the skin or lodged inside the gills, because parasitomos could still be encysted on a grain of sand. What I do as a precaution is leave all fish in a bucket for at least 30 minutes to ensure any sand drops off before transferring the fish into observation. You'll also notice that I have cut out the center of these egg crate lids I am using, and only screen or netting is present there. This is to protect wrasses, gobies, and other fish that are prone to jumping from spinal injuries that sometimes occur when they hit a hard surface.
Now, some of you are probably wondering, does a quarantine tank really need to be so intricate? Not necessarily. You can set up a more simplified quarantine tank with just the following: a heater and thermometer, an aquarium air pump, tubing, and gang valve, an air-driven sponge filter or air stone, and a lid to prevent the fish from jumping out. The sponge filter shown in the photos here can even be seeded with nitrifying bacteria for ammonia control. However, keep in mind that an air-driven sponge filter will not control ammonia as efficiently as a hang-on back power filter, so you may need to use multiples or limit the number of fish that you place in a simple quarantine tank. As a general rule, this simplified approach works better in a small quarantine tank, like 5 or 10 gallons. We do not want to discuss quarantine strategies too much right now, as that is a topic for a future video. However, we do want to touch upon whether you should just observe in quarantine or prophylactically treat. Some hobbyists choose to apply a full range of treatments, while others may just deworm using ProziPro, and some others believe in just observing until symptoms of a disease present themselves. There is no wrong answer here, as all options have pros and cons to them. At the end of the day, whether or not to prophylactically treat has more to do with you than the fish. Observation is the process of closely observing or watching something. It is best employed by those who are observant, attention to detail minded, and have lots of time to watch fish in quarantine. These people will notice not only obvious physical symptoms of disease, such as white dots and red sores, but also more subtle behavioral symptoms such as scratching, head twitching, yawning, heavy breathing, paleness, swimming into the flow of a power head, and reclusiveness. You should begin treatment at the first sign of physical or behavioral symptoms. Chemoprophylaxis is the use of drugs to prevent disease. Those with a busy or hectic schedule, or just don't notice the little things, should adopt some form of prophylaxis when it comes to diseases. Therapeutic copper for 30 days will treat marine ick and velvet. You can dose Metro a few times to also treat Brooklynella. This treatment can be combined with copper. Post-copper treatment, you can deworm a fish by using ProziPro, API General Cure, or Fitz Paracleanse twice, 7 days apart.
Thank you for watching this video. See links in the comments section for more detailed information, and join us on my forum for all reef aquarium related discussion.